Hello, everybody. This is Dr. Z. We are in chapters 17 and 18 for AP European History. This is going to be video 2. So we started talking about the agricultural revolution in video 1 of this set. And now we are going to talk about what happens when, because of enclosures and the agricultural revolution, people start to move into the cities. So as you can imagine with urbanization, it's a large cultural change for Europeans. Europeans had a lot of what were called community controls in the agrarian system, in the traditional economy. In a rural setting, traditionally in a village, people had certain social rules about what was appropriate for married people to do, being faithful, when was it appropriate to have children and with whom, things like that. And one example of a community control that tends to garner a lot of attention in history books is a phenomenon called a Charivari. So basically what would happen is that a married couple, and you can see them kind of up in the window of their cottage here, typically in a Charivari, the woman, the wife, right, would go and cheat on her husband. And then what would happen is that the entire town would come out and shame him for her indiscretion. And so you see the townspeople here. Here's one woman kind of put with a bridal veil on. These people are riding on horses. They're clanging pots and pans. They're yelling and shouting different things. And they are shaming him, basically saying, hey, buddy, you were not man enough to keep your woman in your house and faithful to you. Shame on you that your wife cheated on you. And that might sound kind of antithetical and strange today, but this worked out as a community control in a number of ways, right? It encouraged marital fidelity. Community controls in rural areas also worked to encourage young people, right, who perhaps had sex out of wedlock, right, to then marry each other. There was a lot of community pressure to do the right thing. And with urbanization, one of the things your AP Euro gods would like you to understand is that as Europeans were moving into big cities like Paris and London, then some of those controls started to decline. And as you can see that the populations of many European cities grew, especially Paris and London, through the 16 and 1700s. And the reasons for this growth were the decline in mortality, the fact that there was more food, there was more transportation, there were new crops from the agricultural revolution and also from the Columbian Exchange. And of course, the last outbreak of plague is in 1720. So more people are living in these areas. And as those small towns, especially in England with the agricultural revolution, are starting to get bigger, and more peasants are trying to live off the land. As peasant families get larger, inevitably some of those children will have to move to cities to look for a livelihood elsewhere. With this, though, and with the lack of community controls in the cities, because if a peasant is moving into the city by themselves as a young man or a young woman, and they don't have their family members around to help them in their social predicaments, then the AP gods would like you to understand that this caused what is called the illegitimacy explosion. And I would just like to say here, I hate the word illegitimacy. No child is illegitimate. Every child is legitimate, right? This is a very old-fashioned term, and I hate even saying it. However, it is what this era of history is called. And so it is an increase in the amount of children who were born out of wedlock. And as you can see, in the real height of the Industrial Revolution, height of European urbanization around 1860, it's the highest, right? But it is growing through the 1700s, where we're in right now. So as those cities are growing, so are the amount of children who are being born to single moms. Okay, and some of the reasons for this, of course, migration into the cities, lack of those community controls, Some women were receiving false promises of marriage. And of course, the rising cost of living made having a family harder for men, especially men who were soldiers or day laborers. So this all sort of brings us to talk about what were some of the various birth control methods. And I put the key concept outline for you there. The AP gods do want you to understand this, that there were methods that were considered community controls at the time against illegitimacy, right? So those certainly, would be, for example, a father telling a young man, hey, you had relations with my daughter, you should marry him now, right? That would be considered a community control. But women in particular also exerted, we're trying to plan births as much as possible and have Planned Parenthood as much as possible by a number of different methods that you see here. And I welcome any questions about these in particular. So by the 17th century, so that's in the 1600s, where we see a population growth that is slowing down, right? In the 1600s, there's the Little Ice Age, there's the 30 Years' War, there's food shortages, wars, diseases, things like that. Rural populations are basically ravaged, and there's a real pressure on resources. So there's not a lot of population growth in the 1700s. But in the 18th century, in the 1700s, you see much higher population growth in that time period, okay? Partly because of that illegitimacy explosion that we mentioned before, but also there's a smallpox vaccine, there's fewer deaths, the plague is over, there's better water, better drainage, better sewage, we're preventing things like typhus and malaria, we have the scientific revolution, there's less famine because there's better canals and roads to transport food, there's fewer wars. Okay, and your key concept outline says the balance between population and the food supply stabilized, resulting in the steady population growth. And of course, that better food, right, also is a result of that Columbian exchange. So some changes in family life come along with this. In Western Europe, we see men and women getting married rather late, at age 25, 26, 27. And 10 to 20% of them aren't marrying at all, right, by choice. And we also see in Western Europe that the nuclear family is the norm, right? So that you have a mom, a dad, and kids living in one household, and the grandparents and other generations are living in other houses, not under one roof. In Eastern Europe, in the 17th and 18th century, men and women are getting married a lot younger. And we have to remember that, especially in Russia, right, there's serfdom in certain Eastern European areas, right? And the plight of the serfs is certainly going to play a role in this. There's more multi-generational households. So you have children living with their parents and their grandparents, maybe their great-grandparents, and there's almost no permanent celibacy. So there really aren't any people choosing not to get married. So that begs to ask us then, in Western Europe, why were people waiting to get married, right? So they wanted to wait until they could start their own household, right? For peasants who were also landowners, they had to wait for their father's death to inherit land. So, if people are living into their 60s, 70s, maybe even 80s, then that's they had to wait that long for it. If people are living longer, of course, right? In the cities, people worked to save up for a small business or a home before they got married. Couples needed permission in rural areas from a landowner to get married. And landowners often thought that the freedom to marry for the poor would result in more landless paupers, more abandoned children, and more needed welfare. So it wasn't always a popular thing. And waiting to get married provides an economic advantage in this time period because people can earn more money, save more money, sort of get a stronger economic foundation for themselves before they go and they get married. And of course, they also can still contribute to their parents' income if they're living under, if you're a 25-year-old young man living with your parents, and you're not married yet, then your wages are going to their income. And so that can be helpful as well, and certainly a motivating factor for many people. One of the things that really changes in this time period are attitudes towards children. In the 1600s and 1700s, a lot of children died during infancy. It was not seen as immoral to hit a child. And also, there was the idea that you really shouldn't get close to young children emotionally, because so many young children died and didn't make it to, say, their 5th birthday. So if you don't get close to a child, right, then it makes their loss a little bit easier. And there's a quote here by Michael de Montaigne, who has there's a lot of great social commentary that comes from this source. But he wrote, and it's very sad, he says, "I cannot abide that passion for caressing newborn children, which have neither mental activities nor recognizable body shape by which to make themselves lovable, and I have never willingly suffered them to be fed in my presence." So this might sound very cold until we recognize the fact that he lost 5 of his 6 daughters in infancy, and losing young children was something that was common. But by the 1700s, people started to change their minds. So the Enlightenment was part of this. We see the opening of more foundling homes. These are orphanages. We see women being urged to nurse their own babies instead of hiring wet nurses. That a wet nurse is a woman who will nurse the child for you, right? So will breastfeed the child for you. And we also see rules that are against swaddling. That's like wrapping a child up really tight so they can't move around. We want children to have comfortable clothes, to move around, to be able to have a lot more freedom instead of wearing clothes that make them look like little adults. And children were seen as innocent, right? And as lovely and things to be beloved. We also see, as evidence of this, the first toy stores opening in major European cities. Rousseau comments about children's education, saying that boys need fresh air and exercise. Boys need to be taught practical skills and learn how to read. Girls, of course, should learn their domestic responsibilities, and women's nature destines them to a life of marriage and child rearing. Gotta love Rousseau. And you can hear my sarcasm there, I hope. So these paintings give us a sense of the difference, right? On the left, you see a Dutch painting from the 1600s, and those children are dressed like little adults. Those clothes look very uncomfortable. Notice that they're kind of high up on their neck. They're made of heavy fabrics, right? There's really no difference between what an adult and a child would wear. But then on the the right-hand side, we see a painting from the 1700s where the child is running around, in the nude, and the moms are sort of laughing and watching them. And then I love this child with this little walker, right? What a great contraption to help this child learn how to walk. You can see there that they have the free movement. And even the adults look like they're a lot more relaxed, and there's really a big difference in the garments, right? In what people are wearing, but certainly in the way that children are presented. Okay, we'll pause here and we'll return in just a moment.